workers and their equipment. This combination of brain and manpower can accomplish almost anything. Over the years, technology has put more and more power into the hands of this alliance. Here in the oil fields, workers and equipment toil long and hard to produce the lifeblood of this nation. The oil that flows from these fields feeds the machinery of the world. To recover even more resources than ever, we must continually develop and use methods that ensure the safety of our people, our equipment, and our environment. The worker is the key to safety in such energy-charged surroundings. Control of the technology may be a matter of engineering and design, but controlling the equipment and tools is a responsibility of the workers themselves. With the power and capability of our tools, there exists numerous opportunities for unsafe acts and unsafe conditions. Our workforce needs to be operating at peak efficiency, both physically and mentally, to safely perform in today's work environment. When conditions develop where judgment is impaired or diminished, the potential for danger is greatly increased. Such is the case when illegal drugs are used by the workers on the job. Illegal drug use is a problem that can affect us all, and each of us must be prepared to recognize the danger and cope with the responsibility of handling difficult situations where drug use is a factor. This introduction to drugs at work is designed to help you develop the understanding and skills necessary to cope with this growing problem. We will learn just how bad drug abuse is in America. The statistics are staggering. Mr. Gary Zaverblis, founder of Z Consulting, a leading authority on the topic of drugs in the workplace.
Well, I think we'll refer to some of the more recent statistics. According to Attorney General Dick Thornburgh, 10% or 23 million Americans are abusing drugs. The United States Chamber of Commerce says 10 million Americans use prescription drugs without the appropriate prescription. 500,000 Americans are addicted to heroin. 22 million Americans have used cocaine. 10 to 23% of the American workers have used dangerous drugs on the job. The Department of Labor estimates that drug abuse costs nearly $100 billion a year in lost productivity. About 60% of all the companies with 5,000 employees or more are engaged in some type of drug testing program. From the practical standpoint, what we are seeing through company intelligence, enforcement or auditing techniques, we are generally seeing across the United States between 10 and 20% of the labor force to be found actually under the influence of an illegal drug while at work. For purposes of search, we are finding anywhere from 3 to 8% of the workforce in possession of things that have been deemed contraband by the company. And those are generally drugs, drug paraphernalia, weapons, explosives, and just about all those cases also alcohol. So you can see that the problem is significant.
We'll learn of the many effects that drug abuse has in the workplace. The financial burdens alone are immense. To begin with, the use of illegal drugs in American industry causes a great loss of productivity, causing smaller and smaller profit margins. Great expenses incurred providing sick leave and health care benefits to those affected by this scourge. Equipment damage and theft is greatly affected by drug abuse, but most important, it contributes to accidents to the abuser and others. The confidence and trust in working relationships is greatly affected when drug abuse becomes an issue, thus making for a poor working environment. How do employees use drugs at work? How are they able to get the drugs to their work sites and administer the drugs to themselves without detection? How can illegal drug sales occur under direct supervision? Mr. Larry Congdon, Senior Associate in Z Consulting, and consultant to such institutions as the Department of the Navy.
The trafficking of drugs in the workplace, the possession of those particular drugs in the workplace, and how drug users bring those drugs onto the job site, use them, sell those particular drugs to other employees, are under the influence of drugs. Those areas are all of major concern to industry today. The workplace is one of the best places in which to traffic. First, let's remember, individuals who use drugs generally only bring on the amount of drug on the work site to use for that particular day. You generally will not see individuals bringing 2 or 3 pounds of cocaine into the work site strictly to use it. If an individual is bringing that amount of drug onto the work site, he or she is a trafficker. They are making sales at the work site, and that amount would certainly not be used. If it's marijuana, you'll generally see maybe 2 or 3 marijuana cigarettes being brought on by the worker to be used during that shift. The use of these drugs is generally going to have to be done in some amount of secrecy. Most people would recognize a marijuana cigarette being smoked, an individual attempting to smoke rock or crack cocaine, or a person snorting a powder drug such as cocaine salts or amphetamine, methamphetamine. If a supervisor saw an individual injecting a drug into his arm, I think most of us would realize that that's something of an illegal nature. If an individual does inject drugs on the job site, it will be done generally at a remote location in awful lot of secrecy. The one thing that supervisors must also remember is those that use drugs generally will use them around individuals who also consume illegal drugs. They feel very comfortable in using that drug around other employees who utilize it. But bear in mind, if you don't use drugs, you're not familiar with these types of methods, you will not generally be offered drugs. You'll not see individuals use drugs on the job site. These areas are of concern, obviously, to management, because ignorance seems to be the biggest key when talking about the use, possession, trafficking, sales of drugs in the job site. Areas that you as a supervisor might want to look for trafficking areas where sales can be accomplished. First, parking lots are excellent locations, both inside their vehicles or among a number of vehicles in a parking lot, are excellent locations in which to conduct sales of all types of drugs. We have had instances where individuals will traffic on the CB radios. So if your company has a CB radio system, it's important that you understand the jargon and the language that may be discussed on those CB channels that you're not familiar with. The most common times to use a drug are generally going to be on the way to work, sometime during the lunch hour break, and generally on the way home. If you have individuals working shift work, either an afternoon shift or a graveyard shift, you're going to generally see an increased amount of drug usage during those particular shifts. The same thing with weekends and holidays, because as a rule there are fewer supervisors around to catch them.
What do these drugs do to the workers once they've administered the drugs to themselves? What effects do they have upon themselves and their co-workers and their company? Finally, are there any solutions to this significant problem? Well, certainly education offers hope that in understanding the potential dangers of drug abuse, fewer people will be likely to start abusing drugs. Supervisors educated in the danger signs of employee involvement with drugs would be better able to respond in an appropriate manner. Once the drug-involved employee has been identified, company-sponsored programs may be utilized to help that employee with their drug abuse problem. Company regulations are very specific where drug use is concerned, and each employee must comply with those rules and be responsible for their own actions. With the continuing research in drug abuse, new findings will offer more and more tools to be used in detection and treatment procedures. As supervisors become equipped with the information and skills necessary to more correctly identify drug abuse in the workplace, they'll be better able to investigate the situation, then document all pertinent information for reporting to the appropriate supervisor for action. To provide the latest information in all aspects of drug abuse, the following program features experts in the field of drug abuse and pharmacology with years of experience in detecting, understanding, and treating drug abuse. To begin with, let's examine the various types of drugs in use today. Some of these drugs of choice might just surprise you.
Well, relative to the drugs that are popular today, there are just too many to even begin to discuss. But what we have seen over the last 17 years is that the drug culture has settled into what many of us in the field refer to as the Big Five. But let me clarify that. I'm talking about the Big Five illegal drugs. The biggest problem in this country today is still alcohol, in the workplace, off the workplace. So it's the #1 problem we have. But when you get into illegal drugs, the Big Five are marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine, PCP, and heroin. Those 5 drugs represent over 90% of the illegal drug activity in this country today. So when you begin to think of illegal drug activity, it would be wise to think of those 5, because you're going to be usually right 90% of the time. Oh, one of the things which is a misinformation, or a piece of misinformation, is that marijuana is a gateway drug. And what is a gateway drug? It's is that a substance that begins the drug use. And what we have found out is the true gateway drugs are really nicotine, caffeine, alcohol, and inhalants, followed by prescription drugs, over-the-counter drugs, and you'll constantly see a move towards the more powerful illegal drugs. And then eventually they'll settle in with these Big Five drugs I talked about. When does it all begin? According to current statistics, the average kid in this country begins to experiment between the ages of 9 and 11. So it's early, too early.
How does a drug user get into the world of drugs in the first place? How much does it cost? And where do they get it?
What we've noticed over the last 17 years and quickly approaching 20 is there's been what I refer to as an evolution. If you think back in the 60s, the drugs that were popular at that time were typically administered orally. I mean, you had the downers and the stimulants all taken orally, which is not a real good way of taking illegal drugs. It's slow to onset of activity. You don't get a lot of the drug actually into the plasma. It's a slow route to the brain. So the evolution in use has been that now they've moved into the more direct routes into the body. And that route which gets it into the body, into the blood, to the brain the quickest is what the streets really want, because those are equated to instant highs, maximum highs, intense highs. The drugs have changed. Cocaine dipped all the way down to 20, 30, 40% pure. Now it's constantly sitting in this 60, 70, 80% pure street level. You have hallucinogens more powerful than ever seen before. PCP, phencyclidine, angel dust, a very, very powerful hallucinogenic drug. LSD, of course, is always out there, very powerful drug. And you're getting into what we call amphetamine variants, which are combined between hallucinogens and amphetamine variants. Marijuana, back in the 60s, THC concentration was 0.4%, not even 1/2%. And that's part of the problem with our views about marijuana. A lot of people said, well, you know, I was around the 60s, it wasn't all that bad. Well, it wasn't all that much there either, 0.4%, and many studies in colleges prove it. They gave a lot of students who volunteered to be surveyed and studied real marijuana and fake marijuana off the streets, and they couldn't tell the difference. What is it today? According to the most recent statistics, right out of 1989, California Narcotic Officer Association, the constant THC presence in the western United States is between 15 and 18%. That is substantial increase. Heroin, way up in the 30% pure ranges. You have brand new drugs like fentanyl, which are very, very powerful, several thousand times more powerful than heroin. So in a nutshell, what we have is the culture has come from crude, inexperienced users, manufacturers, and traffickers into high-tech, sometimes pharmacologically trained and understanding users, chemistry background manufacturers, botanists involved in the growing. It's pretty high-tech. Cost varies depending on the drug. Let's talk about the Big Five, because that's the ones you'll probably run into. Marijuana, if it's Sinsemilla or a decent strand of high-potency marijuana, anywhere from $200 to $250 an ounce. That would be roughly equivalent to an average pack of cigarettes. Cocaine, still fairly expensive, anywhere from $50 to $75 a gram. a gram is an individual, would be equal to an individual serving of sweet and low. Methamphetamine is a little more expensive than cocaine now. Methamphetamine is currently running between $75 and $100 a gram in various areas of the United States. Heroin, still very expensive. Of them all, much, much more expensive. Comparison, cocaine for a key of 2.2 pounds would be anywhere from $20,000 to $17,000. A kilo of heroin would set you back anywhere from $200,000 to $225,000. So heroin is very expensive. Down on the street level, you can buy grams for anywhere between $100 and $250, depending on the quality of it. So as you can see, it's very expensive.
Illegal drugs have a negative influence on many aspects of the American economy and seem to affect almost every socioeconomic group. What hold do these chemicals have on those who use them? Why do seemingly rational people risk all they have to play such a dangerous game? Understanding the psychological aspects of drug abuse is an important element in trying to cope with the problem. In the next segment, we'll look at how drugs work in the human body and learn more about the pharmacology of drug abuse. Understanding the way drugs affect the body is vital in learning how to deal with the problem. A medical grasp of the pharmacology of drug abuse will also provide a better sensitivity when working with those struggling with this crippling behavior. Pharmacologists and drug abuse specialists generally divide illegal drugs in use today into 4 classifications: stimulants, hallucinogens, depressants, and opioids. Under the stimulant heading, the drugs commonly listed are cocaine, methamphetamine, amphetamines, Ritalin, nicotine, and caffeine. The common hallucinogenic drugs are phencyclidine. Phencyclidine is also known as PCP. Peyote mescaline, LSD, psilocybin, and MDMA. The depressant drugs are alcohol, marijuana, hashish, hashish oil, Valium, barbiturates, and methaqualone. The opioid drugs are heroin, fentanyl, morphine, opium, Demerol, MPPP, MPTP, and Darvon. Drugs can be administered orally, inhaled by snorting or smoking, or injected into the body by a syringe. A few drugs, such as PCP, can be administered by osmosis or contact with the skin. Injection is the quickest way to get the drugs into the body. It takes the drug directly into the bloodstream and delivers it to the brain. This is sometimes referred to as the vein-to-brain connection. Our body systems react to the presence of these foreign chemicals in a number of different ways. It's important to first know the functions your body's natural chemicals perform. The natural chemicals within the body regulate body temperature and blood pressure, control breathing, prevent depression, provide relief from pain, regulate food intake, cause sleep, dreams, wants, desires, and goals. Your moods, motivation, internal time clock, complex movement and thoughts are also affected by these delicately balanced natural chemicals normally occurring within the body. The complex interaction of these chemicals directly affect our metabolism. The metabolism is affected by how the body accepts, uses, reacts, and eliminates drugs found in the bloodstream. Metabolites, or secondary drugs, are formed when the foreign drug comes into contact with enzymes and other reactors in the bloodstream. This transformation is the body's attempt to control and eliminate the danger to itself. For example, the biotransformation, or metabolic conversion of nicotine, creates cotinine. Heroin creates morphine as the secondary drug. Marijuana contains some 435 chemicals that are broken down into waxy hydrocarbons, terpenes, fatty acids, steroids, certain cancer-causing chemicals, and toxic agents. When these chemicals hit the bloodstream, the body creates over 2,000 different chemicals. The primary drug and its metabolic conversion are both what is termed a plasma life. Plasma life is the amount of time a drug stays in the blood system, providing maximal activity and influence. This graph illustrates a plasma life comparison between being under the influence of heroin to the influence of aspirin in the bloodstream. The plasma life of heroin is 4 to 6 hours. Cocaine, 3 to 5 hours. Methamphetamines, 4 to 6 hours. PCP, 10 to 36 hours. Marijuana, 5 to 8 days. Nicotine is 20 to 40 minutes. Its metabolic conversion, cotinine, has a plasma life of 18 to 24 hours. Alcohol has a plasma life of 2 to 3 hours. If a drug is in the bloodstream, it will be present in the cerebral fluid surrounding the brain. Here, the drug comes into direct contact with the brain, causing the effects we refer to as being under the influence. The addicted or biologically dependent user of drugs will try to live with a minimal concentration of drugs continually in the bloodstream. The addict is living from plasma life to plasma life, truly a blood addict, 24 hours a day. In order for a biologically dependent heroin addict to maintain this minimal concentration of heroin in his bloodstream, 4 to 6 doses a day would be needed. Cocaine users with a biological addiction would use their drug of choice from 5 to 8 times a day. With marijuana, a type 1 user smokes from 6 to 12 times a day. A type 2 user smokes 1 a day or every other day. And a type 3 user smokes from 1 to 3 joints a week. Certain drugs were once considered only psychologically addictive. Cocaine is one of these. Current research reveals that this drug is both physically and psychologically addicting. In fact, cocaine is the only drug laboratory animals will self-administer to death. Let's take a close look at how drugs work on the brain. Dr. Forrest Tennant, consultant to major sports franchises and the NFL.
During the 1980s, there has been one major breakthrough in the understanding of what drugs do and don't do. And it is for this reason that we no longer use the terms, or at least sophisticated people don't use the terms physical or psychological drug use. We really talk with the more sophisticated term neurochemical drug use. And here's why. And here's this major breakthrough that everybody needs to have a feel for. Drugs do a simple thing. They come into the human brain and they drive out one or more natural brain chemicals. Now, the public is already aware of what some of those chemicals are. For example, most people already know about the terms endorphins. That's one of the major drugs that will get driven out by such drugs as heroin and marijuana, and even cocaine and alcohol can do it if you take those drugs long enough. The public's also quite familiar with the terms today, dopamine and norepinephrine. These are the internal body stimulants. So the way a stimulant works is real simple. Caffeine or nicotine or cocaine or any of the stimulants, and some are more powerful than others, come into the human brain and drive out the dopamine and the norepinephrine. And if you drive out the dopamine and norepinephrine long enough, for example, the body will no longer make its normal amounts, and then you become dependent upon the cocaine or the amphetamines. We call that dependence or addiction. In other words, this understanding has allowed us to finally understand addiction. Addiction is when you are substituting a drug for one or more internal brain chemicals.
Tolerance is defined as the changes which a body goes through, primarily in the brain chemistry, which allows the body to both accept and become accustomed to the presence of the drug. Because of these changes, the drug user must increase the dose to obtain the desired effect. As more drug is administered, more of the naturally occurring chemicals are driven out, and the brain stops producing them. Permanent damage to the brain chemistry can then result. This concept of natural chemical suppression is termed negative feedback and helps explain many age-old questions about tolerance and dependence in drug abuse. For example, tolerance appears, at least partially, to be the suppression of a natural neurotransmitter or neurohormone, and its substitution by the externally administered drug. Doctors have learned that cortisone and its powerful analogs, such as prednisone, can suppress the adrenal glands so badly it might stop producing cortisone altogether. This suppression can occur within 10 to 20 days of continuous use, causing the person to become medically dependent on doses of cortisone for the rest of their natural life. Thus, we can see that the brain chemistry can be permanently impacted by drug use. An important medical fact to remember is the faster the tolerance occurs, the more addictive the drug. Here we have classified the tolerance development of certain drugs. Very slow tolerance developing drugs would be nicotine, caffeine, and many over-the-counter drugs. Slow tolerance developing drugs are alcohol and Valium. Intermediate tolerance developing drugs are PCP, methamphetamine, and marijuana. The fast tolerance developing drugs are cocaine, opioids, heroin, and morphine. The rates, or patterns, of typical drug usage are as follows. The experimental user is one who tries a drug one time. The abuser uses drugs for intoxication or euphoria, and may be at first only an occasional or erratic user. The regular abuser is developing established patterns of abuse. The addicted abuser is one who is a constant repetitive user and is striving to live from plasma life to plasma life with a minimal concentration of drugs in the bloodstream at all times. Statistics show that recovery rates for the occasional user are 80 to 90%. These would rarely need medical withdrawal or inpatient treatment. Regular users usually fare worse, averaging about 50%. They typically require a varying degree of assistance of outpatient and inpatient services. The addicted user's rate of recovery is a low 3 to 10%. They require extensive and costly long-term assistance. Illegal drug use affects the body in many ways, and some of those results are irreversible. From a medical standpoint, we can see that illegal drug use poses a great danger to all concerned. Every day on the job, supervisors have a host of responsibilities to attend to. Are assignments being completed? Is the work satisfactory? Is productivity and efficiency increasing? Are the employees in a safe work environment? This last question is in reality the most important one to ask. Are each of the employees under my supervision working safely? While working conditions can be monitored and equipment can be repaired and maintained, the condition of the workers themselves cannot always be determined by casual inspection. Now, how can we tell if a worker is influenced because of drug abuse? What are the warning signs that signal danger on the job site? Gary Zaverbalis of Z Consulting.
I think rule number one for any supervisor or manager is you have to know your people. Bottom line, you got to know them. And then there are very set areas of concern when it comes to substance abuse, and that's employee attendance, absenteeism, the area of accidents and injuries, the area of employee actions, employee moods, followed by employee relationships with others, and employee work patterns. And if the supervisor really stays in contact with their people, watching every one of those areas, and then when you start seeing the so-called telltale signs of change or warning signs, you'll be in an excellent position to either intervene at the earliest stages or, more importantly, stop something before it leads to a serious accident or mistake. But it's also important to note that this is not something I made up. It's something that comes to us via employee assistance program specialists, counselors, doctors, security personnel, employee relations personnel. It's something that's been compiled over the last several years of industry dealing with this problem and asking and going back and looking, was there anything that we probably could have reacted to? Was there something there that we didn't see? And this is what they found out. In the area of absenteeism and attendance, accelerated absenteeism and tardiness, especially Mondays, Fridays, before and after holidays. And the key there is before or after their normal days off. What's that mean? Well, it usually starts that they want an extra day after their days off, because the average user, employee, will try to just use on their time, their weekend time. But if they use too much and they're feeling too bad, they're going to need an extra day. So if they got Friday and Saturday and Sunday off, they're going to need Monday to help them recover. So they won't come until Tuesday. Then you will see if this continues. They're going to start thinking that they want an earlier day to start. So they might start taking Fridays. That typically leads with following up by another Monday, and then they want a day in the middle, and before long you have an employee that hasn't been seen for a while. Just their absenteeism records are just atrocious. Frequent unreported absences, later explained as emergencies. Unusually high incidence of colds, flus, upset stomach, and headaches. Many times, real sicknesses. You have to understand that the using employee's immune system will be affected. Thus, they tend to catch a lot of things. And more importantly, they retain or hold the illness longer than a healthy individual. Headaches, dizziness could be a product of the drug effect itself. Frequent use of unscheduled vacation time. We've all had little things happen that we need to have some time off now, but the users tend to do it a lot. Leaving work area more necessary, frequent trips. Unexplained disappearances from the job with difficulty in locating the employee. Requesting to leave work early for various reasons. Now at this point I'd like to stress to the supervisors that they must document, even if they have no suspicion at all that this could be related to drugs or alcohol, they must document all the reasons that people are wanting away from their station, off the job, or extra time off, and I'll tell you why. Time and time again, going back and looking at companies' files and employees, we're seeing employees who have renewed driver's license 3 times in 1 year. One individual lost his mother twice in the same year. Children being hurt, legs being broke when they had no children whatsoever. And what's fascinating about all this is I've never met a liar, a straight, sober, drug-free liar, that can remember a lie long enough. And if you're lying while under the effects of the drug, you certainly will not remember. Thus, you start seeing repeating excuses. And a lot of times they'll move to a different supervisor, then they'll start all over again. New territory, new boss. Let's start with the ones that worked before. As far as accidents, taking needless risks, disregard for safety of others, higher than average accident rate, both on and off the job. You have to remember here, the average user initially tries to only use on their time, and that usually leads to mistakes and accidents. So it could be some drunk drivings, could be some accidents in a vehicle, you name it. Does that affect his ability to perform his job? Sure. What good's an employee laid up in a hospital when you've got work to be done? Actions, these are very important. Withdrawn or improperly talkative, spends excessive amount of time on the telephone. Why would anybody, particularly a drug user, have to spend extra time on the phone? There's drugs everywhere. That's usually an indication that it's taking him a lot more time to connect, buy, purchase, and that usually indicates that his credit is being stretched. And your credit does not become stretched when you're strictly an occasional, every once in a while user. Argumentative. Has an exaggerated sense of his self-importance. Good analogy, good example. Coach. Went to some of the training I provided and instantly realized what a young kid was all about. A lot of hustle, a lot of energy. Big, huge pupils he's had. Huge, biggest I've ever seen, broad daylight. And now you explained it. To hear him talk, he was the gift of the team. He's the only reason they even won a game. And as a professional, as a good coach, The coach said that on his best days he was average. Displays violent behavior, avoids talking with supervisors regarding work issues. Mood, appears to be depressed all the time, extremely anxious all the time, irritable, suspicious, complains about others, emotional unsteadiness, mood changes, especially after a break or after a lunch. Good example, they come to work, everything's great, everything's fine. A couple hours later, they hate everyone. The question to ask yourself, do you have certain employees that you really don't know how they're going to react from day to day, hour to hour? Big indicator. That suspiciousness will eventually move into paranoia. Relationship to others on the job, overreaction to real or imagined criticism. Here comes the paranoia. A simple counseling session between supervisor and employee to the employee, particularly on the stimulant drugs, becomes a verbal assault, becomes a personal vendetta that they're out to get them, and they react as such. Avoiding withdrawing from peers. It's fascinating. One of the biggest things that got us into all this mess was peer pressure. Kids wanting to be in a group. Now the drugs are causing them to leave what they wanted to be in the first place. They're removing themselves from their peers. Complaints of problems, particularly at home, with other people, girlfriends, boyfriends, family members, and it's never their fault. It's always somebody else's. Persistent job transfers, and I would like to really stress this, and it gets back to a little phrase I coined many years ago that has made sense to many a supervisor. The substance abusing employee, in my opinion, is just like electricity. They both follow the path of least resistance. So a company that's not controlling the problem will draw an employee that uses. A supervisor that's not doing their job right will attract drug users. So what you'll start to see is they'll bounce from one supervisor to another. And you usually see this transfer or movement preceded by some type of disciplinary action or pending disciplinary action. Work patterns. Inconsistency in quality of work, high and low periods of productivity, poor judgment, more mistakes than usual, a general carelessness, lapses in concentration, difficulty in recalling instructions. Do you have anybody out there working for you? You give them a couple of simple things to do, and maybe they complete half of them, and then forget to do the rest. And then when you ask them about it, they don't remember even telling them about it. Difficulty in remembering their own mistakes, using more time to complete work and missing deadlines. This is a product of time distortion. All drugs create time distortion. Time distortion is a fancy little phrase that means that their internal time clock, the same time clock that gives us jet lag, is out of whack. And even though they've never left California, the West Coast, they might be on New York time. So when their internal time clock's is incorrect, then their deadlines, their progression of work becomes off.
These behavioral patterns can indicate a drug problem in your workforce. The question arises, how do I know if the employee is under the influence? In discussing the various types of drugs being misused, certain characteristic patterns of behavior can be observed in each case. Dr. Forrest Tennant, consultant to major sports franchises and the NFL, explains the symptomatology or the characteristic behavior of individuals under the influence of the Big Five illegal drugs.
The most common question I get asked about workers is, how do you tell if a worker is on drugs? The truth of the matter is, you probably can't tell in many cases. In fact, maybe in most cases, because most workers are not very addicted, they're not very disabled, and so it's hard to spot them. However, some workers do get themselves into such an impaired situation that certain signs and symptoms will show up. Now keep in mind, I'm using the word impaired here, and what I really mean is chronic impairment. In other words, some diminution, some disability, some reduction of bodily and mental functions over a period of time. Now, what do you normally see? The most common things you see results with the time equation, meaning they're doing something wrong with their time. They're coming late to work, They're not getting their reports in on time. Work is slowed down. Or it can be the reverse. They go off to a lunch hour supposedly for an hour, but come back in 5 minutes and think they were gone for an hour. So you see that type of situation also. But fundamentally, the number one symptom that we have observed in workers of all kinds, whether they were an NFL football player or whether they were a truck driver or a roustabout, has to do with being late or doing something that was not done in a timely fashion. Keep in mind that's the number one thing that drugs do to the worker over time is impair their time ability. Now, other things that you commonly see are such things as mood swings, such things as rages, losing their temper, such things as not getting instructions correct. In other words, once you've driven out of your brain just a handful of your chemicals, let's say 5 or 10%, you no longer have the ability to assimilate a written or verbal set of instructions. In other words, they might get one instruction, but if you all of a sudden give this worker who's been taking a lot of marijuana over a period of time or a lot of cocaine over a period of time, and you give him 3 or 4 instructions at one time, he'll only get one of them. And if you think back, you'll notice that, well, you know, I noticed this guy could get all that before, but now he can't get that information. There are 5 major drugs that are used and abused in the western United States today: marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine, PCP, and heroin. Now, we have workers who use all 5 of those, but the most common ones are marijuana, cocaine, and methamphetamine. All of these drugs can give you what I've already described as chronic impairment, the loss of time control, the loss of ability to assimilate instructions. The big danger is the person who takes a drug like marijuana or cocaine just before they go to work or at lunch, or they've used too much the night before, and they have impaired themselves by 5, 10, or 15, or even 30%. Now, what do I mean by impairment in this case? Fundamentally, we are talking about hand-eye coordination. This is the same kind of coordination that you need to hit a baseball or catch a pass or drive a semi-truck or climb up a ladder. It is that impairment that causes the accidents, it kills people, it ruins millions of dollars, drives up workers' comp rates, accident rates. These are the things that supervisors, for example, just have to learn something about. How do you recognize these people? The only real way to recognize these people is to know something about eye signs. Everybody has this terrible misconception that this person who's going to drive your truck off the road or ruin your million-dollar piece of equipment is somebody who staggers into work. Don't look for anybody staggering into work. You can literally work around thousands of drug users and never see anybody stagger, so don't go looking for staggering. What you have to look for is the person who's got the dilated pupil, got the constricted pupil, the red eyes, the droopy eyelids, the person who looks a little blah, who may not quite pay attention like you'd want them to. But I can't emphasize enough, every supervisor on the job today needs to take a little special training in eye signs, because that's the way you really can spot these individuals.
Drugs primarily work on the nervous system, and they are divided into central nervous system stimulants, central nervous system depressants, central nervous system hallucinogens. What we have found out that the organ of the eyes is directly connected to the brain, which is the nervous system. And when drugs are in the brain, they're also exerting tremendous effect on the eyes. And what we have further learned, as most of these drugs love to attack pupillary activity. A normal healthy set of pupils will change in size based upon various forms of stimuli. The most common would be point of focus or distance. We have learned that for the pupil to appropriately see an object in front of its face versus quite a distance away, the pupils must adjust or change size to allow it to be properly focused and see the accurate amount of distance. We've also noticed that they are very quick to react to light change. And this is a protect react and adjust and allow for the light. Or the opposite would be going into a very dark room. Can you still see? No. But does your vision begin to return to you? Yes, it does. So the drugs love to attack pupillary size and response. And if you want to tie them back to groups of drugs, central nervous system stimulants and hallucinogens typically do 2 things. One, they will dilate the pupils way, way bigger than they're normally supposed to be. They will be several times outside the normal limit. They will also affect the pupil's ability to change based upon light challenge or light stimuli. The central nervous system depressants, these are your powerful painkillers and very powerful sedative type drugs, will constrict the pupils, make them very, very small, and again remove the ability to react to light challenge. Then you have other drugs like marijuana that really don't favor dilated or constricted, but typically hold somewhat of a normal size, but they will not change based upon light change. They can be broad daylight, zero light, and they typically stay about the same.
Up until just this very time, we've had a very negative view on recovery rates from such drugs as cocaine, methamphetamine, and certainly heroin. Today, however, we're having to modify that. We're starting to see that in certain groups of drug users, the recovery rates are excellent. We've always had quite good recovery rates with alcoholism. What we did not have was the quantitative urine test and the ability to separate drug users into low-level users from high-level users. The low-level users, meaning those people who carry a small unit of drug in their urine or body, they have excellent recovery rates, gets up in 85–90% range. Those people who run very high levels in their body have obviously become dependent or addicted, and their recovery rates are less so. Now, the party line up until just about this time has been, oh, 90% of those people are going to relapse. We can't say that anymore. The techniques that have been developed behaviorally and nutritionally and medically are allowing us to get much better rates with cocaine than I even personally talked about as recently as 1 or 2 years ago. We're getting recovery rates even with the hardcore cocaine addict, it looks like, up in the 60–70% range. So it's not near as hopeless as it used to be.
Now, with a basic understanding of the types of drugs in common use today, the dangers caused by their use, and the behavioral warning signs that indicate drug problems, you'll be able to more easily recognize a drug problem in your workforce. Drug abuse is a serious personal problem, and often the abusers themselves are trapped in a destructive cycle of addiction. As a supervisor and as a friend, we have a responsibility and an opportunity to help them onto the road to recovery. Our goal is not to fire every employee with a drug problem, but rather to help them stop this destructive behavior. When we stop drug abuse by employees, we also eliminate the dangers created by using these illegal substances. When we enter company property, we agree to comply with all company policies, including our comprehensive drug policy. The laws of the land are just as clear. Using illegal drugs is prohibited. Take the time to become familiar with these regulations and make sure that every employee under your supervision understands them clearly. As a supervisor, your #1 assignment is to maintain a safe, healthful working environment for the employees in your charge. Specific safety awareness concerning equipment, conditions, and personnel are all vital to this goal. If employees on your staff are drug impaired, the chances of injury to themselves and others are much greater, not to mention the loss of productivity and possible damage to equipment and property. Protect your workers from the dangers of drug abuse by being alert to the warning signs you've learned today. With a basic understanding of the types of illegal drugs being used today, the effects these drugs have on the human body, and the symptoms displayed by those under the influence, we can better respond to situations where illicit drug use is a concern. As a supervisor, completely investigate any allegations of an unsafe working condition. If the situation is possibly drug-related, document the behavioral indicators that indicate drugs may be involved. What leads you to believe drug use is the problem? What warning signs is this employee displaying? What do you suspect? Is the danger immediate? Are others in danger? If danger is immediate and action needs to be taken, you as their supervisor have the responsibility of advising the employee that concerns exist as to their fitness for duty, and then escorting them to a private area, such as an office. From there, further discussion and evaluation can occur. Remember, it's not your place to test the individual for drug use. Don't try to take the place of law enforcement. Try to gather any information available concerning the situation by direct observation, review of employee performance, or attendance records. conversations with coworkers, or perhaps a talk with the individual involved. You may request another supervisor, your manager, or an employee relations rep to assist you with these observations. Any of these methods are fully within the scope of your assignment as a supervisor. With this information, provide a complete record of all the pertinent information to your immediate supervisor, who will then take appropriate action on a case-by-case basis. With the knowledge gained during this program, supervisors should be able to respond to situations where drug abuse might be an issue. Let's see how this supervisor handles what starts out to be a typical phone call.
Hello?
Yeah, I gotta talk to somebody. We got a guy out here that's doing drugs or something. Somebody's gonna get hurt out here if he says ain't taken care of.
What would you do? First of all, reach for something to write on, because you're going to need it.
Well, we sure don't want anybody hurt, do we? Where is it you work?
Our supervisor just asked a very good question. Our natural impulse is to ask, "Who is this?" But that just might cause our informant to hang up. By simply asking for information, the pressure's taken off the caller for a moment and allows him or her to convey more information.
Yeah, we're on a section 19 right now. We're on a pulling rig.
What makes you think this person has a problem? Who are we talking about anyway?
Steve Pearson's. I mean, he's been really messing up on the rig. He just about blew me out of the birdcage today.
By asking for reasons why our informant suspects drug use, the supervisors learned a lot. Now comes the moment of truth.
Who am I talking to, just in case I need to get a little more information?
What do we have here? An employee with an axe to grind or a serious safety problem? What do you do next? First of all, document the time and date of the call, a best guess as to the sex, age, and nationality of the informant, and any other information learned by the call. Was it made from a noisy location? Any identifiable noises in the background? Do you think it was long distance? Write down to the best of your ability exactly what was said by both parties. The next morning, it's probably a good idea to visit the rigs out on Section 19, Steve Pearson's in particular. Using the information you've learned in the drug awareness video, you'll have a good idea of what to look for. You get out to the rig and Steve and the crew look okay. You pull Steve off to the side to get a closer look, and he looks like his same old cheery self. Now what? Well, investigate his attendance record. Has he been sick very much lately? Talk to fellow employees about how things are going. Does anything appear abnormal? Then you must determine what action should be taken. Do you remove Steve and the others from the workplace? Do you shut down the rig? With the possibility of drug use, investigate every aspect of his behavior you can think of, remembering that your tipster chose to remain anonymous. If dangerous conditions exist, you must take action. In any case, document all the information you've gathered into a comprehensive report that will give your supervisor all the information available on the situation. Your goal as a supervisor is to help our company be a profitable, successful organization. You've been selected as a supervisor because of your ability to help achieve this goal. Help your fellow workers realize their full potential and help them enjoy a safer, more fulfilling career by using the skills and information you've learned in this program today. Protect your fellow employees. Drugs have no place in the workplace.